Welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a great lunch and got a nap in for some of you for joining from the more fun time zone crossovers. We are joined now by Lilly. Lilly is a penetration tester, digital security consultant, and public speaker who serves on the board of Digital Rights Watch. Lilly specializes in web application security, privacy education, and the history of technology-related issues, bringing these topics to an international audience. She believes in the power of consumer and tech worker action to help the technology industry better serve the people it affects. Take it away, Lilly.
Thank you. And hey everyone, I hope you are all doing well on this fine Blur's Day. Thank you for being here with me. I'm Lilly, I'm a historian and a hacker, and I'm currently a security specialist at ThoughtWorks. You can follow me on Twitter if you like retweets about poison, or you can email me if that's more your speed. And for the next 20 odd minutes, we're going to talk about JavaScript and vampires. What's my deal with vampires, I hear you ask? Vampires are notoriously unable to enter a house unless they're invited in. Despite your best intentions, and while you might have been told never to let a vampire in, there are plenty of tricks that vampires can use in order to get you to let them in. So disguises, pleas, cunning ploys. And when they're in, they generally want to drink your blood, which may or may not be a thing you actually want. In the same way, you may sometimes find that the web application that you've been building is serving JavaScript to your users that you didn't intend to be there. And what that unexpected code does could be good or bad. There's plenty of good JavaScript and plenty of good vampires. Friendly vampires will hang out around the house and, do your laundry, do your dishes, do the cleaning at night while everybody else is asleep. Friendly JavaScript is all the stuff that makes your site work the way that you want it to. It makes your page look nice, allows you to build games inside your app, or see how popular your latest post is, let you chat with other people. But there's also evil JavaScript, and there are certainly evil vampires. In this case, when you find one of these things inside without warning, they can drain your blood, your money, your user base, your processing power, sometimes your entire life. Just so we're clear what's at stake here. Needless to say, most of us want to ensure that we're only letting in the good ones and keeping the evil ones away. Most JavaScript will end up being served from your app in one of three ways. It'll be embedded in the HTML, called from another file that you're also serving, or called from another file that someone else is serving. In the security advocacy world, we spend a lot of time educating folks about the pitfalls of third-party JS libraries that you might be bundling up and serving yourselves, and about how to sanitize input to prevent cross-site scripting attacks from your users. But when it comes to the issues thrown by calling JavaScript directly from some other domain entirely, we don't pay nearly as much attention, in my opinion. And maybe you're all over this and you're thinking, yeah, Lilly, I know it's just how the internet works. But if that's the case and you think you don't need this talk, I don't know, perhaps there's someone on your team or in your professional life who needs to hear this and who needs convincing. Please stick with me, because I'm going to give you tools, information, and arguments that should help make these conversations with those people a little bit easier. We see lots of attacks in the wild that happen as a result of sneaky third-party JS. The majority of the popular ones are done for one of two reasons: mining cryptocurrencies and stealing credit card details, because the bad guys really have no imaginations. Like, seriously, today's browsers can access your camera and your microphone and your screen. I'm sharing my screen from my browser right now with you, and this is how you can see and hear me. Far worse things are possible. But no, cryptocurrencies. Cryptojacking, by which I mean using third-party JS libraries to mine cryptocurrencies in users' browsers, was fairly popular up until relatively recently, thanks to services like CoinHive, whose entire product was letting you use browser power to mine Monero. It's estimated that the actual amount of real-world money mined by these scripts, I don't know, is in a couple of tens of dollars, I think. And in several cases, the attackers actually messed up the attack and have succeeded in printing the JavaScript code directly onto the page instead of executing it. So that's about the level of cunning we're dealing with here. It's become less of a problem now because CoinHive went offline a few months ago, and while there are still a few competitors out there, none of them have the popularity CoinHive did. Still a bad experience for the users of those apps though, and an overall bad experience for the planet. MageCart is the attack I've seen the most often making headlines. It was this attack that was responsible for the British Airways and the Ticketmaster data breaches of credit card numbers and login details for more than 400,000 people in 2018. And it cost British Airways £20 million in GDPR fines. But it's still circulating in lots of places. It's a credit card skimming attack in which attackers modify existing shopping cart checkout code to process the payment as usual, while also sending off all the submitted details in a tidy post request to the attacker's server, where they sell them on to whoever wants them. The reason these attacks are possible is because of the way the modern web works. Now, here's a statement calculated to make a third of you feel really old and to make another third of you think that I'm really old. Back when I was first messing around making websites in 2001, when I was about 12 years old, one of the first things I learned was that the primary sin a web developer could commit was to hotlink your assets. That is, to source a picture or another resource directly from someone else's website in your code. Firstly, because it was like stealing from that other person, and it would cost them a lot of money to have to keep serving their picture over and over to your users. And secondly, because if that person figured out what you were doing, they had the power to change that picture to a different picture that said, this webmaster is a stinky butthead. And then that's what all your users would see. So if you flash forward, 20 years, we have evolved to the practice of extreme hotlinking, otherwise known as content delivery networks or CDNs. A major point of CDNs is to host stuff so that you don't have to, and being really, really good at serving things to you fast. But it's still hotlinking. It's still asking your website to fetch things from someone else's and trust that they are what they say they're going to be. Most of the time, this tends to work out, unless the CDN service themselves decides that they don't like the thing you're doing, or because they get compromised, or because they were never trustworthy to start with. Scott Helm puts it pretty well, in my opinion. Using a CDN is consensual XSS, and we're trusting the CDN not to do anything untoward. We put lots of trust into these things. How thoroughly do most of us evaluate what we're using? There are lots of CDNs that will work directly with you to supply the assets you provide them to your users around the world. But there are also lots of other third-party services, often built on the backs of those CDNs, that act as public JavaScript repositories that will serve any version of any JavaScript library or anything else in anyone's GitHub repo or NPM package directly to your site as executable code. All you have to do is source their URL in your HTML. I'm talking about services like JS Deliver and Unpackage and RawGit. Many of these sites are run by passionate members of the community who want to give other developers like them the tools they need to make great stuff. But a lot of these services are run by like one person or very small teams who cannot possibly keep up with every single script that people use their service to share. This presents security issues not just in terms of file integrity, which we'll get to in a second, but with availability. If you're relying on one person to keep the site up and renew the domain your website trusts to serve it with code, that's a hell of a bust factor. Let's look at githack, one of these third-party CDN services. The site's aim is stated right at the top. raw.githack.com serves raw files directly from various source code hosting services with proper content type headers. It's true that sites like GitHub will serve JavaScript files with content type headers that are of type text plain, so that you can't directly reference someone's raw file in your own site, because the browser won't treat that file as executable. GitHub does this for a couple of reasons, one of which is because they themselves aren't a CDN, but I'd also guess it's because they cannot be liable for actually running whatever random code any one of their millions of users decides to push at any one moment. So if you go and reference this file straight from someone's repo, you're saving a bit of time in uploading and serving that file yourself, but you're also trusting that the functionality of the code won't substantially change, and also that that developer or the group of developers with commit access to that repo have all turned on MFA and don't reuse the same password across all their accounts, and that they themselves aren't intending to do anything malicious. That is a lot of trust to defer. Then you're also deferring trust to the person who cached that version of the file to the CDN in the first place. Githack has a beta feature that lets anyone purge cached versions whenever they want, so an attacker could come along and make sure that their malicious edit to the code ended up being the one that was cached. RawGit, a third-party CDN service that githack seems to have been based on, was actually officially sunset in 2018, precisely because people were using the service to poison the cache with cryptojacking scripts, and the single person who was running the service couldn't keep up with it anymore. Despite it having been in this state for about 3 years now, I have still seen RawGit used by sites as recently as several months ago, which is a sword of Damocles if I ever saw one. Apart from developer libraries and CDNs, the other reason that third-party JavaScript ends up in apps is most often because of advertising and marketing tooling. I'm talking about Google Tag Manager, analytics tools, advertising network panels to make back a bit of money. And while I'm the first to admit that I know nothing about marketing, there are plenty of reasons why people use these tools that aren't just about vanity graphs. The main reason with this type of tool and why I'm calling it out specifically is because these kinds of things often get added outside of the usual developer pipeline. Google Tag Manager is literally code injection as a service, and it can mean that marketers are able to update those code snippets directly onto the site. And those snippets often then call on Fourth-party JS, and then it's kind of a free-for-all. This is also the kind of place where mage card attacks are especially effective. This is why it's really important that you know how to spot your vampires. As a developer, you might think you know what code is ending up in the HTML that ends up getting served to your users, but you may end up being surprised. I know that supply chain problems are really hard to fix, and at some point we really do have to make decisions about who to trust, or nobody would ever build anything ever, because the overhead would just be way too difficult to manage. But in most cases, we can control the sources of the code that will end up in front of our users. This is low-hanging fruit, and we should pick it. So, in brief, here is how you spot a vampire. Look from the outside in. As a pen tester, this is what I do all the time. We often don't have access to the source code. We see the app the way that a user will see it and work backwards from there, whereas most developers will see their site from the inside out, knowing how they've built it up and what checks exist along the way. I suggest it might be educational to take a closer look at your app and the way it's presented to your users. Use a proxy, capture the outgoing requests when the page loads, and see exactly where you're asking your users' browsers to go when they visit you. Is everything you're seeing there subject to the dependency checkers and vuln scanners that I know you've got built into your pipelines? Or is there stuff there that surprises you? I know that I only really became aware of this problem when I stopped being a developer and started being a pen tester. And you might have laughed before about things like githack and RawGit, but I'm talking about them today because I still see them get used in live production websites even now, all the time, mixed in with other libraries that people are serving themselves. So when you've seen what you're serving, you face the unenviable task of working out what to do about it next. Don't worry, I'm here to help you with that. The first part is the technical solutions, of which I'm pleased to inform you that there are plenty. I only have 30 minutes, which is not enough time to explain any one of these things in great depth, but I want to touch on them so that you can refer back to this later and dig into these if you need any of them. This is the slide, probably the one you'll want to screenshot and go research later if you need to dig into any of these terms in more depth. There are plenty of mechanisms to put in place at the web app and browser level that will help ensure that you're only loading the JavaScript that you intend to load. I'd recommend going through and reading about all of these if you don't recognize any of them, but prioritize learning about sub-resource integrity and the content security policy most of all, because they're the ones that are most adept at saving you. In brief, sub-resource integrity is a mechanism for checking hashes of the files you're loading to ensure that they are precisely the things you intend to load, and then blocking them if they're not. The content security policy does a lot of other stuff that isn't just about third-party JS, but it lets you define a list of domains and subdomains from which your site will accept assets loading. It can be handy if you've already pruned out sources that you don't trust or you can't trust, and I would recommend also not allowing things to load from stuff like Wildcard, AWS S3, because literally anyone can host things in that domain. Be as specific as you can. The real solution here, like so many things with tech, is people-based. To stop the vampires from getting in, you are going to have to talk to people and come up with a systemic vampire management plan. This is the place to make your case for doing JS right. Talk about the worst case. You can use the notable attacks that I highlighted earlier if you like, or just Google MageCart because there's stuff happening all the time. Talk about the user experience you're presenting to your customers if you can't guarantee that the JavaScript that you're calling on is the thing that you intend it to be. And most importantly, work with your like-minded colleagues to come up with a strategic approach for tackling this, because in lots of established businesses, it can be a really, really, really hard case to make to anyone whose sole concern is not security, which is most people. In our ideal, amazing, golden utopia state, we'd select each one of our vampire guests with incredible care. That is to say, we would use only the specific JavaScript that we needed, we'd host it ourselves, we'd have a lovely maintained register of all the stuff we were using and all the dependencies, we'd automate our updates and our patches, nothing at all would happen outside of the normal developer flow, and we'd all live happily ever after. But we know that real life isn't like that, and it's not always going to happen that easily. So, once you've done your looking from the outside in that we were talking about earlier and tracked down what kinds of JavaScript your web app is actually serving to people, start looking for your short, medium, and long-term plans for getting to that ideal state. This is going to vary depending on the challenges that you face at your specific workplace. So please adjust these to suit you. You might never get to that ideal state, and that's okay. You're just one person. We can't win all the fights, but see what's within your ability to control. So with that caveat, here are my suggestions. In the short term, find out exactly where all of that outside-in JavaScript is coming from. Do you recognize it all? Is it all covered off in your usual deployment process? Or is there stuff being added in that you weren't aware of? If so, go and find out who added it, where they fit into the thing, and what their actual use cases are. Empathizing with these folks is going to be really important too. They are just doing their best at their jobs, and they may not have realized what risks they're really introducing. Do your best to understand what they're trying to achieve, and if there's a more secure way, you can help them achieve it. Does this mean, for example, that developers and marketers should pair on Google Tag Manager work? Does this mean that we need to start looking at whether we can host more of our own stuff? This is a period of time where you should start trying to get folks on side. TLDR, don't be a jerk. Medium term, trial some of these process changes and adjust them where needed. This is also a good time to start working on how to roll out some of these basic technical controls I mentioned earlier, although I know that content security policy implementations in particular can be a real pain in the butt, which is why I say start working on and not roll it out. By now, you should also have a clear list of what you're serving to people and at least be monitoring that for any changes and incorporating as much of it as you can into your usual pipeline. This is also the point to start assessing the CDNs that you're using and asking yourself questions about their security practices, their reliability, and all of that kind of stuff. Are there any that you see that you're serving that you could pare back? Or can you at least use one source if you're using multiple ones? See what works for you, see what's practical. In the long term, you want to work towards getting everything using sub-resource integrity at a minimum and content security policies, if you can manage that. Hosting this stuff yourself is ideal from the perspective of being able to strictly control the domains from which you will accept JavaScript. Tightly maintaining a list of third-party sources and evaluating new ones as you go will also help to ensure that things just can't get pushed out to the site willy-nilly. By this stage, you should hopefully have as much as possible under the one umbrella. Developers and marketers working together to ensure that the scripts that are being deployed are all serving useful purposes and coming from suppliers that can make reputable guarantees about their own security, and you will ride off into the sunset and be very happy. And once you've done all this, you will be totally 1000% unhackable and safe from all vampires forever. The end. Okay, no, you won't. There are still lots of other things you need to keep an eye out for, and security issues never end. The security issues involved with using third-party JavaScript are one of a really small facet of the larger issues that can occur with making computers talk to other computers. And for better or worse, we're all in this never-ending game of cat and mouse forever. All we can do is our best and keep on top of the risks that we're exposing to ourselves and to our users in the course of our work. I will be putting up a list of resources on my website if you want to refer to any of this or dig into a lot of the sources that I looked at while researching this talk later on. I haven't put it up yet as of the time of me speaking, but that will be happening very soon. And that's it. I wanted to leave you with one of my favorite vampire tweets. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you. That was really excellent, and chat's been going wild. And you're probably lucky we're not at an in-person conference, because you may get your glasses stolen if we were.
Oh dear. No problem. Are there any questions in the chat? I have deliberately not been looking.
Yeah, I'm trying to quickly scan through.
No problem. We need hold music.
I suspect many will appear, probably just as we finish being live, because that's how the rules of these things work.
Well, if you
which is
want
probably
to know,
going to be the easiest way.
I got my glasses in Tokyo, so I hope that helps. It probably doesn't at all.
Well, soon. One day. Flights will be a thing people can take again.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We will be back in about 15 minutes at 2:15 Australian Eastern Time. So we'll see you all shortly.
Great.